Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra as always with James from Gunnerblog. James, good morning to you.
Good morning, Andrew. How you doing?
I'm all right. Slightly traumatized by David Attenborough.
What's happened?
Well, I watched his new show on Netflix over the weekend. It's all about the migration of animals.
I'll express immediate relief because whenever anyone's worried about David Attenborough, obviously at his age, I fear the worst. So I'm glad it's not that.
Yeah, I mean, it's another beautifully shot piece of David Attenborough nature, which is, they're always amazing shows. But this one in particular seemed to be very, very, I don't know, it was trying to tug on the heartstrings a little bit. Here is the most beautiful baby animal you've ever seen. But there are predators waiting at every turn. And you're like, oh my God, it's a little baby, foal or baby zebra or whatever. And is he going to make it across the river where the ancient evil reptile crocodiles are going to chomp him in two? But he gets there in the end. And then there's the other stuff like this mother and her polar bear cubs have to swim for miles because there's no ice anymore because of climate change, which is essentially your fault for not recycling that bit of plastic in the green bin last week. And I said, I don't need that. I mean, I get it.
They used to be quite relaxing shows to watch, didn't they?
Yeah, this one not so much. And then at the end, I'm not giving any spoilers away here, but there's a brutal scene involving, a baby whale, which are quite big, they're not tiny things, and a group of orca. Now, orca, as we know, the magpies of the sea.
The magpies of the ocean, part of the dolphin family.
Well, yes.
Which we know your feelings on.
Yes, and that was particularly brutal. So I'm not recovered yet, but hopefully the week will play out in a nice, calm way, and I can get back on an even keel. So
it's interesting that sort of planet guilt. It creeps in everywhere. Even the nice weather, it's sort of, there's an edge to it, isn't there? Of course, the world is on fire.
But it's nice in my back garden. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I know, right? And I went to another children's party over the weekend. This is my new lifestyle.
Sure.
These are the big events in my social calendar. And there was a woman there who was entertaining the children, and she was clearly, and I say this with love and full knowledge that there but for the grace of God go I, and probably inevitably there go I at some point. But she was clearly an out-of-work actor in a princess dress doing some songs, right?
Right, okay.
A couple of £100 though, good day's work.
Sure.
But she was singing to these 3-year-olds. It was a 3-year-old's birthday party.
Mm-hmm.
And the environmental messaging is also present in the songs that she is singing. So at one point she was singing this sort of quite jolly, upbeat tune to all these 3-year-olds who are like clapping along. She goes, "We have to save the planet before it's too late." It's just this sort of really bleak messaging.
Before you grow up in a world where you have to live underground like mole people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You will live in desert land for the rest of your life. It's just sort of incredible. I guess they've got to find out eventually, right?
Yeah, true. I mean, there is a time and a place, but
Our generation fucked it for you.
There will be no water, so you'll have to consume each other for vital liquids.
It's a cheerful start to the pod.
It sure is. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's going to get better from here. When we start talking about transfer rumors and all those kinds of things. You know what else?
Sports washing. We might get some sports washing in as well.
Yeah. I lost my wallet somewhere. Can't find it.
You did?
Yeah.
When did that happen?
Sad. Well, I had it coming home on Saturday night, and I haven't seen it since. And it's not in any of the usual places. And I don't have an AirTag thing on it or anything like that. So,
but no one's spending your money.
No one's actually. Well, they didn't yesterday. I should have a look now, actually, and just see Like,
yesterday was a Sunday. A lot of the shops were shut.
Shops don't shut anymore.
No,
Do
I
they?
know.
They
No,
don't.
not really.
I don't. I'm just going to log into my banking and just see what's happening here.
Just people just bought Phil Collins tickets. The ultimate insult.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine? Right, let's have a look. I'm logged in, and no, nobody's been spending anything, so it's got to be somewhere. But I feel quite, unstable without knowing where it is. You know
How long are you going to give it?
Gonna have to give it like at least another day to sort of try and, I probably threw it somewhere. And it's, down the back of a cushion or something like that.
You must stop throwing your wallet.
Do you throw your wallet? Or do you place it somewhere?
Definitely not. I don't. I'm not so reckless. I can't be. I place it, and I know I put it in the same place all the time. And if you think I'm saying that place on air, Andrew,
no,
you're crazy.
No, I won't. I won't ask. But that is a good tactic, I think, rather than just to sort of randomly throw it on either a shelf or beside the bed or on the sofa, which is where, I usually chuck it. Because
this could be a learning moment.
It's one of those little small ones, that sort of the cards push up and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah,
so it's not
that's hard. They do disappear.
It's not.
Mine falls out my pocket in the car quite often.
Right.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, so the car is like on a slight incline, I guess, the seat and the wallet. So I fairly frequently, I'm like, I've lost my wallet, and then I open the car and it's down the side of the car seat.
Right. Well, I wasn't driving, so it won't be in the car. So anyway, I'll keep you up to date, and I'm sure everybody's really interested in this.
It's good. We've got that thread to sort of run across the summer.
Sure. Where is the wallet now? If someone's going to start sending me there'll be a random Twitter account of my wallet at the Grand Canyon and that kind of stuff. Here it is.
Yeah. We're holding it hostage.
Yeah. Where do you want to start then today when it comes to all the exciting Arsenal-related business that is going on?
What a question. I don't know. There's so many directions we could go. I suppose we should start with the thing I learnt about most recently.
Okay.
Which is that I woke up this morning and watched a video of Flo Balogun scoring his first international goal for the USMNT, as they're known.
Yes. I mean, it's quite... can't they just be called the US team? Well, I suppose the men...
Well, to be fair, I think it's probably a consequence of the fact that the WNT were quite successful for quite a long period of time, and maybe almost more widely known sort of in the country than some of the male players. So it's probably a good thing. Probably speaks to equality of some measure.
Sure, that makes sense. So USMNT, Balogun scored, Flo Balogun scored the second goal against Canada, and a very nicely taken goal it was as well. I saw him, a little video of him afterwards with Matt Turner. Talking about
what were they doing?
They were celebrating in the dressing room, looked to be having a fizzy drink of some kind.
Crazy.
Yeah. And Balogun said something like, Arsenal connection, bro. Something like that, anyway. So,
did it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we had a load of questions, actually, about Balogun and Nketiah and that kind of stuff. And actually, there are some quotes from him this morning as well. Let me just see if I can find them. Where Balogun is basically saying, I'm not going to go on loan again. He said, I'm not sure about the discussions that are going to take place. I'm not sure what's going to happen. What I can say is that I definitely won't go on loan again.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, well, somebody wrote in and suggested like a debate where one of us argues for Eddie Nketiah and one of us argues for Flo Balogun.
Okay. Do you want to do that?
Okay.
Will we flip for whoever gets whoever?
Yeah, that seems fair.
I don't have a coin, but I've got an SSD card, like one of those little memory card for a camera type thing. Okay. So it's got some writing on one side, it's completely blank on the other side. So do you want writing or not writing?
I'll have writing, please.
Okay, I'm just going to flick it up in the air, and I will. Oh. You've got writing.
Ooh.
So who do you pick?
Okay. I pick. I'll pick Balogun.
Thought you might. So I've got to pick.
By the way, I can't find who suggested we do this, but the reason I wasn't going to do it is because I was like, there's one of these I can make a better argument for than the other, and it doesn't feel fair.
Yeah, it's from Overall Online on the Discord.
Okay.
He said, I propose a short debate, one of you in the Flo corner, the other in Eddie's corner. Why should we keep you, and why it makes more sense to sell the other? I'll say, let me go first, given I've got the shorter straw here. I will say that as an advocate for Eddie Nketiah, the reason why you should keep me is because we could sell you for quite a lot of money and then use that money to invest in the squad. And you know Eddie can score some goals sometimes. And that's kind of it. That's what I got here.
Well, if I was representing Flo Balogun, I guess I would say, well, I can score goals too. I've scored goals at every level.
Mm-hmm.
I've done something Eddie's never done, which is led the line for a team across an entire season, as I did last year in France. If I was, what else would I say in favour of Flo Balogun? I'm the younger player, so maybe the greater potential to improve over the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm a bit taller, and that makes people feel more secure. Come at me.
I'm not really arguing. I can't really debate this because my own position on this is if there was a choice between the two, I'd like to see Balogun get a go. So I'm not really fighting Eddie's corner particularly hard here. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? Where, a guy who's a backup striker, he doesn't really score any goals off the bench when he starts games.
Eddie Nketiah's agent is safe in his job with you representing him like this, Andrew.
I think, he's also Flo Balogun's agent, so, neither of us are winning here.
He's basically doing this. I think he must be like in those meetings like Gollum, pretending to represent one, and then he turns around and he's like, but this one is got great potential, kind of thing.
It's quite possible. I think we've seen over the last number of years, we've seen enough of Eddie to kind of know where his ceiling might be, or at least to have a good guess at it. You can never say never, right? But we could have a good guess at it. Whereas with Balogun, like you say, he's younger, he's gone to France, he's scored 25, 26 goals, albeit in a league where Alexandre Lacazette scored a similar amount of goals and he looked like he was basically eating pudding for the last, 18 months at Arsenal.
Old MacDonald won the Golden Boot, I believe.
Really?
Yes, in the Farmers League.
Of course. So, I think there is some measure of caution in inverted commas to be taken from Balogun's season. I think it's very impressive. I'm not taking anything away from it, but I do think scoring goals at Premier League level is a bit more difficult. However, I would like to see what he could do. Ultimately, though, does it not boil down to what he wants to do as a player? Does he want to stay at Arsenal and be more on the fringes or the periphery of the starting 11 than he would be if he went somewhere else? Does he really want to give it a go? Does he back himself to take his chances at Arsenal if his role is secondary to start with? I think that's a very interesting aspect to this. Or does he just, want to say, okay, look, I've had a brilliant season. My stock is high. I've got a lot of good choices ahead of me. And I want to take one of those choices because they're showing the kind of faith in me that I want Arsenal to show, for example.
Yeah, I think the thing about the debate thing is that we could have the argument at length back and forth about these two players, but there are two factors, as you alluded to, that's sort of outside of Arsenal's control here. One is, what does the individual want to do?
Mm.
And one is, what interest is there in the other one?
Yes.
Ultimately, we probably haven't got space for both of them in the squad. So if we're going to sell one, then we have to sell, we need actually interest there to do it. And one imagines Balogun, after the season he's had, there's probably going to be more interested parties, probably at a better price. And I suspect that might weigh heavily in the decision.
Yes.
But I do think he's going to be... He's gonna be a star. I think he is gonna be a kind of star. I don't necessarily mean like he's gonna be the next Erling Haaland or Kylian Mbappe, but he seems like a man who's very driven and determined and he has that kind of Saliba-esque quality of being like old for his years, seeming to have a career plan. I think he's made a really smart choice to go and play for the US.
Yes, I agree.
I think it's going to elevate him as a kind of brand, if that's not a horrible word. I think he's going to be a big player on the international scene. So, yeah, a big part of me would like to see that happen at Arsenal. But if he is, when he gets his head set on something, he's very driven to get there. If he wants to go and play regular first team football, he probably recognises, as much as he loves Arsenal, it might not be the place to do that. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it is. You have to look at all the factors, as you say. Like, if there was a buyer out there for Eddie Nketiah, and if someone was to put money on the table for him, and we said to Balogun, look, we've got Gabriel Jesus, we've got Leandro Trossard who can play there, but you're another striker, you're another 9. Not completely different from Gabriel Jesus. I mean, they're not the same player, but I think Balogun is probably a little more clinical in the penalty area from what we've seen anyway from this season. But if that was an option on the table, I'd be really keen for Arsenal to make that happen. The question is anybody in for Eddie? Is anybody going to buy him? Is anybody interested in taking him?
His name's been mentioned in dispatches as sort of relating to Declan Rice and West Ham. There's been the odd mention, hasn't there, of their kind of latent interest in Eddie, I think, which has been there in previous windows. I wouldn't know at this point in time. But Balogun, I think is going to have plenty of suitors. So Arsenal might even be able to generate a bit of an auction there. It's a really interesting one, and I think the fact that it is the same agent representing both players almost adds a layer of intrigue and complexity to it as well.
It does.
He's completely privy, right, to all those conversations that are happening with both strikers.
Well, that's it, and I was sort of worried about that. I don't want to call it a conflict of interest, but I was worried about that relationship when Balogun was, nearing the end of his deal. Like, what assurances did Arsenal give to that agent and those players, both Eddie and Balogun, for them to sign new contracts, with the club? I know there's a bit of a time gap between them, but obviously when Arsenal gave Eddie a new deal last year, there must have been some career plan put in front of him that he went, okay, this is good, because he could have left for free. He could have gone on a Bosman. I think he would have gone, or would have had a fair amount of choice. Well,
interesting in Balogun's case, I think one of the key things when he signed his new contract was this assurance that you'll go out on loan, and you'll have this opportunity to develop yourself. And obviously he really seized it and took it brilliantly, that chance, and embraced it. And it's interesting that now he's like, I've done that. Because obviously he went to Middlesbrough the season before that as well for
6 months,
6 months or so, yeah. So I think he feels like he's done that portion of his career. Now it's time for the next step. And he probably looks at someone like Erling Haaland and thinks, well, he's at Man City now, but what was the move he made before that? He went to Dortmund. He went to a place with a great record of producing young talent where he knew he'd play regularly.
Sure.
I'm sure he's scouring Europe thinking, is there an opportunity like that for me where I'll be one of the first names on the team sheet. I know I'll get the chance. And it's a brilliant stepping stone to where I ultimately want to be.
Sure. I mean, I suppose the difference is that Haaland was making progressive steps up the football ladder, you know, from the time he was young, going to Salzburg, was it? And then Borussia Dortmund, and then Manchester City. So each one was a step up in terms of the level, whereas Balogun is already at Arsenal, a really good club for young players, as we've seen, a club that's in the Champions League, etc., etc. So I think this is going to be a very interesting one, and one that might play out over the course of the summer. You know, we're going on a tour of the US, right? We're going to play the All-Star game in Washington, D.C., I think, and then Manchester United, of course, in New York, and then Barcelona in Los Angeles. I mean, if your squad includes the USMNT's number one striker, hot new thing, it would make a lot of sense to make sure he was there for those games. You know, if you accept that part of preseason obviously is about conditioning, about tactics, about, you know, getting everybody fit, etc., etc. But another part of it is building your, again, coming back to the brand thing. It's about generating, you know, new supporters and new fans from all over the world, which is why we've gone to, you know, all the places that we've gone to over the last number of years, you know, all across the world. Part of that is to give you visibility so that you generate new supporters and your global fan base grows. It just would make sense to have Balogun in your team for those games in the US.
Well, also, even aside from the kind of marketing angle, I would like Mikel Arteta to take a good look at this player.
Yeah.
You know, at close quarters, as he's done previously with William Saliba and, you know, one or two others who've come back from loan spells, and make that assessment then when he's working day in, day out with Flo Balogun and Eddie Nketiah. And if he does that and he makes a call, I think we have to trust it based on what he has seen. I think it would be a shame if Balogun were to leave without ever even having that kind of pre-season period to make his case. So there would be lots of reasons that it would be great to delay this decision a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I guess...
it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, it's not lost on me that when Balogun was negotiating his contract, all the indications were kind of, he's not going to sign it, he's not going to go, until Arsenal was sort of forced maybe to sort of roll out the red carpet a bit and, you know, make him an offer that met what he wanted. And so I think we can take it at face value, the reporting that, you know, he's likelier to go than to stay. But I don't think we can rule out that there is an element of that to this as well, that, you know, he's just saying, these are my demands, these are my expectations, and the ball is sort of in Arsenal's court as to how they deal with that.
Yeah. I mean, how do you view it from the perspective of somebody who might say, well, look, you know, he's a young striker. Arsenal are a team on the up. They finished second in the Premier League last season. They are improving. You know, is it a bit premature of somebody like Balogun to sort of make demands is not quite the right word, but to say, look, this is what I want in my career. And if I can get that here, great. And if I can't get that here, then I'm willing to move because, you know, that's what I want. I think it's perfectly reasonable for a player and a talented player and somebody who believes in themselves to say, you know, I don't want to play second fiddle, even to somebody like Gabriel Jesus. If it's unrealistic, I still think, well, fair fucks, he's backing himself for that. You know, a footballer's career is relatively short, so you do have to try and make the most of the opportunities you have.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do see the case that who is he to be, you know, holding Arsenal to ransom or whatever expression you want to use. But I think it's not only reasonable, I think it's sort of quite admirable in a young player to be so single-minded about what you want and your trajectory I actually think it's a really positive indicator for him and his career. I think players who have that kind of mentality often achieve extraordinary things. I mean, Nicholas Bentner was someone who was mocked for his level of confidence and self-belief, but actually I think he's sort of the outlier in some respects in terms of the disparity between his self-belief and what he ultimately ended up achieving. And I think there are a lot of different factors that contribute to that. I think by and large, these top athletes, they all have that level of conviction in what they're doing. And I think, I think it could be a really helpful thing for Balogun in his career. So, we'll see. I'm really, really, really curious to see how this one pans out. If I was putting money on it today, we did our transfer predictions last week and I had him on the list to go. I still think probably he will go because he seems to have quite a fixed idea and plan for his career at this point in time. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't at least curious to see what he might be able to accomplish with Arsenal next season.
Yes, I'm with you on that. I suppose the other thing that we should talk about is the pursuit of Kai Havertz, which I don't think we talked about last week. I don't think that had really emerged to any great extent last week. Maybe we did talk about it, but, so much has happened in the last week. I've, lost my wallet and all kinds of things. But it does appear to be one which has a significant amount of legs, as they say, probably 2 legs. But there has been, I think, a fair amount of reaction to it as well. And also, some of the stuff that's going on at Chelsea, which I'll ask you about now in a minute. But what's your thoughts on Havertz? Let me actually put a question to you because we did have a couple of questions here. Let's see. Hi, my name is Co on the Discord said, if we end up signing him, where do you see Havertz fitting into the team? He's mostly played as a 9 at Chelsea. Is he an 8 coming in for Xhaka? Obviously, Arteta sees something in him and has a plan. I'd love to hear your takes. And Jad says, there's been a lot of totally reasonable and calm discussions about Kai Havertz. That I think was in the sarcasm font, but I can't tell. And where he's going to play if we signed him. But all of this discussion is based off the way we set up last season. Do you think it's possible that since next season is potentially phase 4 of this team's development, we could see Arsenal set up differently and hence make the panic around Havertz's potential position a bit overblown?
A lot there. We didn't really speak about it last week because it hadn't really caught light as a story. The only sort of reference which we spoke about it was when we were discussing, how much money we might spend this summer or who we might bring in. I think the first thing I did was text my brother, right, who's a Chelsea fan, as long-term listeners will know. And he came back to me straight away and said he's been very bad for the last few months at Chelsea, but I still wouldn't let him go because there's clearly a brilliant player in there. And that sentiment was kind of backed up by Liam Toomey, who's one of the Chelsea correspondents in Athletic, who said, there's something crushingly inevitable about how Havertz is going to be brilliant for his next club. So, he's not the most popular man with Chelsea fans, but I don't know how much stock we place in general in their opinions of footballers. But I think the ones I trust most among them recognise there's certainly a lot of talent there. I don't think that's really in question at this point.
Yeah, I've got a cousin who's a big Chelsea fan as well, who said basically the same thing. Really talented, completely not wasted playing up front, but like as an ill fit for the striker's position at Chelsea. And I do think as well there is an element of it being quite difficult to properly gauge any player at Chelsea on an individual basis over the last couple of years because of how weird they have been as a team and as a club, But he was highly rated before he came to Chelsea, wasn't he? There was a lot of hype around him at the time and it felt like a big move for them and it hasn't worked out. I mean, how much of this do you think is the Chelsea factor? Like, tainted by association. And obviously we've had some deals with Chelsea players down the years which really haven't gone particularly well. And the other aspect of this is their financial issues, which I've got a question about now as well. But the idea that we could be giving them money that they're then going to go and spend on a player that we want, that way. Is that unfair reaction? Is it a bit simplistic to sort of say, well, if we give Chelsea this, they're just going to add it all up and go and get Caicedo, and that will be all our fault?
I think that's too simplistic.
I agree.
I think that if we are willing to give Chelsea X million for Kai Havertz, we're doing that because we think we're getting the better end of that deal. And I think that Chelsea will find a way to spend money in significant sums this summer, irrespective of what we do. Like, as is becoming clear, and we will get to this sort of subject in question, they have various financial levers that they can pull to kind of liberate them from some of the FFP restrictions, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they'll find a way to do that. And, we're sort of seeing that start to happen already. To come back to the player and the Chelsea thing, maybe. I mean, there is a bit of a checkered history there. It's principally Willian. I think Luiz, a lot of people didn't like it, but actually I think when he was actually on the pitch for us, he had good moments and bad moments, certainly. Jorginho, I think, has surpassed a lot of people's expectations. I'm not saying he's been a world beater or anything, but I think he's shown himself to be a decent player and was actually quite useful for us in the second half of the season at times. But there is still a slightly uncomfortable feeling about signing a player from, a rival club and a club we don't like. I sort of think if Mikel Arteta really believes in Kai Havertz, and clearly they do because he won't be cheap, whatever fee we negotiate, his salary will put him, at the heavy end in Arsenal terms. Certainly, I would imagine north of £200,000 a week, based on what his package has been at Chelsea. They must really love this player. And I personally feel like, as a decision maker and in terms of talent identification, Mikel Arteta has earned my trust. So if he really thinks that Kai Havertz can be a big contributor for Arsenal, then I'm excited to see what that might look like.
Yeah, listen, I completely get anyone who feels like this is annoying or underwhelming or a deal you don't particularly like because of what the player has done at Chelsea over the last little while, which is not brilliant by any means. So I absolutely get that. And I share some of those concerns. And do I worry about the money? Not especially worry about the money, but I think there's a point where you could go much more easily and say, okay, yeah, it's well worth it for that kind of money. Whereas I think it's a little towards the high end of where I would feel comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. However, there have been numerous examples in the last little while of Mikel Arteta backing a move for a player over whom fans had a lot of doubts and which ultimately turned out to be good deals for Arsenal. You can think about Aaron Ramsdale. You can even think about Ben White, for example, where people were going, yeah, Ben White's good, but 50 million? Is 50 million good? That's a lot for Ben White, but here we are down the line and, those deals look very good. So, I'm not saying everybody should just accept everything without questioning it or without having their normal, I guess what you would say, your sort of visceral reaction to something, right? Where you can think about things differently than maybe your heart feels about them, But I think there is evidence that Arteta has, when it's come down to it, made good decisions about players who can fit into this team and give him things that he wants. And what's sort of blind to us at this moment in time is what does he want from Kai Havertz? What's your sense of this? Is it, I've seen people ask, like, is he going to be the 8? Is he going to play in the Granit Xhaka position? Is he somebody who could play, up front with Jesus? Is he somebody who could play on the right? He's played on the right for Chelsea quite a lot as well. So do you think he's more of a front three player or more of a attacking midfield addition, or perhaps a bit of both?
That seems to be the big question at the moment. You know, I've seen a lot of debate about that online. I mean, you know, I said to a couple of people, including, I said to ask my brother, do you think he could play in Granit Xhaka's position? Bear in mind, he watched a lot of Arsenal last season. And he was like, absolutely not. No way. Not having it.
Right.
Now, that's one man's opinion. But I also spoke to some people sort of around Arsenal and said, look, could he do that job? And it was kind of a maybe. You know, maybe if you set up the midfield in a certain way, if Martin Odegaard played slightly deeper, if instead of Thomas Partey you had a more defensive-minded player tucked in behind Kai Havertz in certain games, maybe at home, you could do that. But I think, crucially, the one person I haven't spoken to about it, of course, is Mikel Arteta. And he will have his own ideas.
Just ring him up now, then. Hang on, I'll wait. Ring him. Give him a shout.
He doesn't take my calls anymore. But I think... See, I personally think people are going to get annoyed about this because I feel like people want him to be the number 8. But I personally think that he's someone who'd be more in the front three.
Yeah. More
as a kind of quasi number 9, like, you know... or maybe even a second striker if we went to two up top. I think that's where we would see him most often. But I didn't think Ben White was going to come in and be converted into a right back a year later. Or, you know, I didn't think Granit Xhaka was going to be a box-to-box midfielder. Part of the intrigue is not knowing, you know?
Yeah. No, I agree.
What do you think?
I think my gut feeling is that he'd be somebody who gives us depth in the forward positions. Because, you know, we're going to have a lot of games. We're going to have a lot of Champions League games. We are going to have to rotate. They're not going to be players who are going to play every single Champions League game and every single Premier League game. You know, we have to be sensible about how we manage our squad. And the way to do that is to add players who you believe can function properly at the levels you want to be at. And I think Havertz obviously has played. And he scored a winner. Did he score the winner in the Champions League final?
He did. We said last week, I think maybe, or maybe we did talk about it briefly because we were talking about what did he do in Porto, and that was what he did in Porto. Scored the winner against Man City in the Champions League final.
So, you know, he's got experience at that level. Whether people like him or not, there is that experience there, and I think that could be useful. I don't see him really as the 8. I think he's clearly a very good technical footballer, but I don't really see him in there, and I would trust your brother's judgment. You know, he's watched him an awful lot more than I have, and he's watched Arsenal a lot as well. So unless there's something changing in the way that we're set up in midfield, then I don't see that. But I think it's somebody who's coming into the forward line.
I mean, something may change in midfield. We don't know. I think that... I do. The thing is about him coming from Chelsea is obviously, you know, a lot of people are uncomfortable with it. But personally, I would find it very funny if he came from Chelsea and fulfilled his talent. You know, that would be amusing to me. And there is a good track record at Arsenal of extremely gifted young players who've made a big move in their career and it hasn't necessarily panned out for them. And then they've found a home at Arsenal, you know, and I'm not saying Havertz is on this level, but that's the story of Dennis Bergkamp. It's the story of Thierry Henry. It's arguably the story of Martin Odegaard. You know, we have in our recent-ish history developed players who have maybe kind of taken a wrong turn in their career. And I there was a good clip of Thomas Tuchel talking about Havertz, and he was talking about him and what he could be and his talent level. And Bergkamp and Robin van Persie were both players that he cited as kind of similar stylistically. I think he has been a little bit victim of not really having a position at Chelsea, and a lot of people say, well, his best position is kind of a second striker, but not a lot of teams play with a second striker these days. Havertz himself has described himself as, I think he said, I'm basically a midfielder that makes runs into the box. That said, he's played a lot of his football as a number 9. So it's a bit of a enigma. And I'm very curious if he comes to Arsenal to see how it pans out. But I think if he does come to Arsenal, in terms of pure football talent, I think he'd be in the top 10, 15% of our squad. I think he's got that much natural ability.
Well, it will be...
Mesut Ozil had more natural ability than anybody, but he didn't always find it easy to fit, you know?
Well, that's it. And look, the last thing I'll say on him is that I can't see us splashing out that amount of money without having a clear idea of what he can bring to the squad. And that
he must have had those conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
Because he's decided on Arsenal effectively at this point in time. So from his side of things, this is a move he wants to happen. To be honest, I get the sense from all sides that this is one that probably will happen, that kind of suits everybody. So very interesting to see. I mean, I know that people are looking at it and saying, well, that's, 50, 60% of what would be required to sign Caicedo, or I thought we were getting Rice and Caicedo. But I have always felt that we are losing the Granit Xhaka of last season, not the Granit Xhaka of 5 seasons ago. We're losing a player who brought goals and assists to this squad, and that needs to be replaced as well. So I've always felt there would be at least one attacking addition just to ensure we have multiple goal threats within the group.
That makes sense. I mean, sort of moving on a little bit of a tangent, there was a report or a little tidbit from Fabrizio Romano saying that he believes there's a concrete chance that Thomas Partey could leave the club this summer. Does that feed into this, or do you think that would be a separate thing? And how do Arsenal, if they do let Thomas Partey go and let Granit Xhaka go, how do you bolster your midfield in that sense? Because if you're looking at Havertz as somebody who's playing further forward, losing Xhaka and Partey and bringing in only Declan Rice leaves us, I think, very short in a key position.
Yeah, and I don't think that would happen. I think if
what do you think wouldn't happen? That we would leave ourselves short, or that we would let both of them go?
Oh, I think if we let both go, we'd bring in another deeper midfield player alongside Declan Rice. And, there were links this week to Romeo Lavia of Southampton, which has long been known that that's a player that Arsenal like. A lot of other top Premier League clubs also like him. So it's not exactly a free run at the player. And I think there's also something in his contract with Man City, isn't there? A buyback potentially, which could complicate matters. But somebody like that, I would envisage, would come in. When I sort of did some digging around Lavia in the week, the messaging was kind of, the message I got was sort of, that's something that might happen if somebody else left, and that somebody else could only really be Thomas Partey.
Yeah. And what do you think of
we have discussed previously, haven't we, on here, that he could be, inverted commas, surprise departure this season. Yeah,
and there's talk of clubs in Saudi Arabia being interested. And I think this is still very, very early in the summer, but the potential impact that the development in the Saudi Arabian League could have on the European transfer market is, I think, something to keep a really close eye on over the course of this transfer window, not just in the Premier League, because I think the Premier League exists in its own little bubble, which is why we see more and more transfers between Premier League clubs, particularly the big clubs. That's just the way it goes when your league is the richest in the world. But, the talent pool that they could bring in from across the big leagues in Europe is really quite something. The sort of players that they could attract. And then the money that goes into those clubs who will then try and replace those players. Everybody could be a bit flush. Well, not everybody, but there could be quite a lot of money sloshing around by the end of this transfer window.
Well, it must be an enormous relief to Premier League clubs because, as you say, in the last few years, they've only really been able to sell players to each other. There was that brief window a few years ago when China were big players in the market, and Chelsea took great advantage of that at the time. They sold a number of players, Ramirez being one, Oscar, I think, for big money to China, to bankroll spending of their own, and navigate FFP. And now it looks like they may be the major beneficiaries of the emergence of Saudi League, which from what we read and what we imagine based on the amount of money behind it is probably a more sustainable operation, something that may keep going in the longer term than Chinese Super League. So yeah, that is a fascinating development. As for Partey himself, I mean, it would be a gamble, I guess, to allow both Xhaka and Partey to leave in the same summer. They're 2/3 of the midfield that propelled Arsenal into the title challenge. But I guess the squad has to continue to evolve, and there has been a sense ever since he arrived at Arsenal that Partey would probably eventually leave for nothing at the end of his contract. I think people have sort of accepted that he was likely to come to Arsenal, see out his contract, and then go elsewhere. So maybe they're just thinking this summer, if there is an opportunity via Saudi or via elsewhere to actually make some money back on this player, maybe it's something worth doing.
Yeah. It would be tempting if you could get actual money for him and you could then renew your midfield. But of course, it would be all about how well you replace both those players. Like if Declan Rice is the de facto replacement for Granit Xhaka, then you're going to need somebody who's pretty much oven ready to come in and replace Thomas Partey, So,
I still think Declan Rice will play at the base for Arsenal. I think he'll play in Partey's position personally.
Right. I just sort of meant in terms of like one out, one in. I think it's
for sure
going to be when
Partey goes.
Yeah,
you've got to get somebody in. And look, I mean, I've said several times on here, I don't think it's going to be Caicedo. In the last 7 days since we last did one of these pods, things seem to have more and more is emerging about Caicedo and Chelsea, and I just feel that one is. I felt for a while that would be his destination, and I still think that.
What a complete lack of ambition from that player. Joining a
I mean, it almost makes you think his January plea to join Arsenal may not have been entirely heartfelt, but
who knows? Who knows?
Who knows? We shall see. It's. I think the midfield jigsaw is an interesting one for Arsenal this summer, and it seems like there's quite a big redevelopment job going on. It's interesting. We spoke in the run-in about how we felt Arteta would be ruthless this summer. And I think we may be seeing that happen. But even when it happens, even though we sort of say at the time, we've got to be ruthless, when it actually happens, it can be quite uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah. You're a bit like, ooh, is that a bit too ruthless? Maybe.
Yeah. And maybe, who knows? We'll have to find out. But I'm really, interested to see what happens there. What else?
Well, why don't we take a little break here, because we're gone 49 minutes in, so we should probably take a little break.
Okay,
yeah. We've got some questions and stuff like that, which can kind of continue the theme of this conversation. But let people make a cup of tea or whatever, and we'll come back in part 2. Yeah,
let's do it.
All right. You missed a big opportunity there.
I know, right?
Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part 2 where we answer questions that you sent to us on Twitter at Gunnerblog and insert about 5,000 ads here at Arseblog, just to give you the full audio Twitter experience. Also on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you're an Arseblog member on Patreon. We had a lot of questions, James, we were talking about Chelsea and Havertz and Thomas Partey in Saudi Arabia and the developments in the Saudi Arabian League. And there was a tweet from James Knowlton, who's at JD Knowlton. He said the Saudi Public Investment Fund now owns majority stakes in each of the Saudi clubs, the big four that are being pushed as the ones to take all these players from Europe. But they also have invested in Chelsea's majority owner, Clearlake Capital. Chelsea owner Todd Boehly visited Saudi Arabia this month, and now Chelsea are selling unwanted, high-earning players to these teams. Talk of Mendy, Koulibaly, Ziyech, etc., etc. Are you in any way surprised, or is this a very, very cynical way of looking at the world that we live in, that a hedge fund, a vulture fund, whatever you want to call them, might be up to financial shenanigans?
I can't. I'm still upset about saying let's do it instead of let's do this at the end of part 1, Andrew.
Fucked it, yeah. I mean, completely.
Fucked my own catchphrase.
Do you want to just stop now?
I just don't really see how I'm supposed to carry on with the podcast. I'll just crowbar it in now. Let's do this.
It didn't really work.
Fuck. Damn. Andrew was celebrating over the break between part 1 and part 2. He thought it was the end of Let's Do This. He was running around his office. It's going to come back bigger. It's going to come back stronger.
I'm on board. I got the tattoo and everything.
You've got the tattoo. That's true. So, yeah, this is really interesting. I don't know as fact that Sanabil, who are an investment arm, I think, of PIF or the Saudi royal family, are invested in the company that owns the majority of Chelsea, Clearlake. I've read the same as you, but I haven't dug into it. I don't know.
Right.
I find it entirely plausible because Sanabil are basically a listed partner in pretty much every major Silicon Valley fund. Their reach is pretty extensive, and you can see a lot of that on their website. The interesting thing about Chelsea is that there's a big sort of black hole in their ownership. There's because it's a fund, not everyone knows who's got a stake in Chelsea, and that adds a sort of layer of intrigue to things. Todd Boehly, as we understand it, went out to Saudi Arabia and came back with bids for 4 of his first team players that he doesn't want anymore.
It's handy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good trip, to be fair. Probably to a value of about 100 million or something like that. Not bad work. It's pretty... It feels a long way from Arsenal's partnership with Beveren, doesn't it, back in the day?
Yes, it does, rather. It does.
I guess this is how all this starts. But, it's pretty bleak.
It's hard not to be cynical, isn't it? That wheels within wheels, or palms being greased, or whatever it might be, that there is... it's probably above board. It's probably not illegal to do it, but it might be morally suspect, But this is where we are with, the rules on finances in football, multi-club ownership, all that kind of stuff. It's ripe for abuse, if that's the right word, or certainly, You could take advantage of some of the lack of restrictions or regulations in this kind of way. But yeah, it's hard not to be cynical. Chelsea don't want these players.
The rules are there to be bent, aren't they?
They certainly are. They certainly are. And it's like, I don't know, can't beat them, join them, or do you take the moral high ground, or what do you do in a situation like this? Yeah, I don't know. I'd need to see more information.
Well, I guess we will sell Thomas Partey to Saudi Arabia.
Well, I mean, we were talking about Nicolas Pepe last week as well, weren't we? You take the money because everyone else is going to take the money. Everyone will take the money. That's just the way it goes.
This is an interesting question from Simon Bird, who's at Birdman Lives on Twitter. And they said, as two people have made their careers around football, could you ever imagine a moment coming, and how far away is it, where you walk away from the game entirely, given the road it seems to be headed down in terms of owners and monetary dealings, etc.?
It is a really interesting question. The reality of it is, like, I think if you took us youthful, spry, fledgling bloggers from 20 years ago, right? And immediately brought us forward 20 years and said, this is what football's going to be like, you'd say, fuck, I don't know about that. That seems a bit grim, doesn't it? Don't really think that how could that happen? But what happens is it's incremental. It's the boiling frog analogy, isn't it? That things just happen and you get used to it, and you get, it all sort of happens across the board in a way. I mean, I guess there would be, but I don't quite know at what point. Yeah.
It's tricky as well because, you've got a certain obligation or duty. You've got a community, that you maintain and support. So to walk away from them would be a big thing in itself, right?
Well, that's it. I mean, and you can, to a certain extent, cultivate your own football community, whether it's your friends that you go to games with or don't go to games with, or that you meet in the pub wherever you are in the world. The unpleasant aspects of football don't make the really pleasant parts of football any less pleasant. You know what I mean? So going to a game or the social aspect of being a fan of a football club and meeting other fans and all those kinds of things, and the way that football can and does, I think we can sometimes get a little bit blinded to the seedier aspects of the game and how it operates, and we forget that football plays a very valuable role in the lives of many people, and football clubs do a lot of good in their communities and all that kind of stuff. You can lose sight of that when you see stuff like this going on. You think it's just, well, this is fucking Black Mirror bleak kind of, there's no escape. We're all being sucked into this chasm of horrendousness. I don't think that's necessarily everybody's experience, because if it was like that, you wouldn't be part of it, So what happens is football, or those aspects of football, they piggyback on all the good things, and we still enjoy all the good things. We enjoy the goals, we enjoy the games, we enjoy the days out, the nights out, whatever it might be. They don't really change, but it's all the other stuff that's underneath it that does. I don't know. I mean, where else can it go? Like, beyond some sort of evil intergalactic race coming along and buying a football club, what more can... this probably sounds stupid or naive, but where else can it go? Like, I don't know.
So, yeah. What else could possibly go wrong? Fast forward 10 years.
Yeah. What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is what it is now. I was really struck in the week by this tweet from Tariq Panja, who's a journalist at the New York Times. And Tariq said, was talking to a similarly middle-aged fan yesterday, and I'm prepared now, having turned 37 over the weekend, to include myself in that bracket.
Sure.
And he wrote, and I realised, for all our sense that something is wrong with the game, it might be us. maybe the younger generation are all in on state-backed super teams, top clubs hoarding best talent, and lopsided games. Times and tastes change. And I don't know. But I do think as older fans, we probably have to be mindful that our sort of gut reaction to the way the game is going may not be a universally held opinion.
I guess, but I suppose when you follow a sport or when you're interested in a sport, what you want is some sense of fairness, sporting integrity, competitiveness, right? Mm-hmm. Because it is boring when one team is so much better than everybody else. Like the only jeopardy is like, oh, who's going to finish top four? We already know who's going to win the title. Boring. That's got to be boring for everybody apart from fans of that one particular club that are going to win everything, right? So I think there is something, I get that times change and people's experiences change and what you're open to, if you grow up with something one way and 30 years later it's something completely different, there is a tendency to look back and say, oh, those were the good old days. That's when football was really football.
Yeah.
But what you could easily also say is that football has never been as skilled, as technical, as physical. The developments in the way that clubs and players develop tactically, all those kinds of things. This is the way that the sport changes and everything else. So I do worry a little that you can look back with rose-tinted glasses and not appreciate what you've got in front of you. But I think those things are slightly distinct from who owns the clubs. Where does the money come from? What is the reason for this person investing in this football club or this country or this billionaire or this oligarch or whatever it is? I mean, even going back to Abramovich, the very first one, the one that completely changed the landscape of football, Roman Abramovich did not buy Chelsea because he loved football. He didn't buy Chelsea because he loved Chelsea. He didn't buy Chelsea to engage in a sporting project that would bring him success and therefore he could feel validated by his investment. The reason he did it was to make sure he had a high profile at a time when oligarchs were going through some difficult periods. And so being visible gave them a sort of protection. There were political reasons for his investment in Chelsea, and there are political reasons in the investments that are being made now. And we all know and understand what they are. But I do think they are distinct from the game of football itself, even if they're having a very big impact on the competitiveness in the Premier League, certainly in France. There's there are real negatives about those kinds of investments, even if it's probably a lot of fun for fans of Man City or fans of PSG and maybe fans of Newcastle now, maybe fans of Manchester United if that deal goes through. I mean, it will be very interesting to hear what Manchester United fans would have to say. I'm sure they've had a lot to say about Manchester City's success and how it was achieved. Will they have the same things to say if that investment goes through?
Well, we all love our teams and we all want our teams to win. And I bet you the day after Man City completed their treble, there was a lot more support for a Qatari takeover of United than there had been the day before.
Probably, yeah.
I think that is probably the reality. I mean, in the week, when was this? A couple of weeks ago, maybe June the 9th. Newcastle United announced their multi-year front of shirt sponsor as Seller, a dynamic creator of spectacular experiences and iconic destinations across recreational industries, based in, you guessed it, Saudi Arabia. And they had the nerve in their announcement video to say we went through a highly competitive process. I mean, just absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, nobody believes that.
No, but equally, within the rules. So as I say, they're there to be bent, and there's plenty of people out there bending them. I think there could be a point where I might think, I don't know if I can hack this. But
I think there is, but I don't quite know what it is yet. I mean, if what happens if Arsenal are bought by a nation state?
Exactly.
What if Luxembourg bought Arsenal? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's sort of hypothetical, but I guess there is. Everybody has their own line in the sand, I think.
But my suspicion, I mean, this game is getting bigger and bigger and more popular than ever on a global scale. So however many of us draw a line in the sand, there'll be plenty of other fans lining up to replace us.
For sure.
I think is the reality.
Yeah. Let's move on to something a little more football-y and perhaps less depressing.
Okay. It's a novel thought.
Sten10 on the Discord said, I've been pondering the curious case of Ainsley Maitland-Niles. That sounds like a movie, doesn't it? The Curious Case of Ainsley Maitland-Niles. Starring James McNicholas. Let's do this! Do you think that if Ainsley had a crystal ball and was able to see into the future, he'd still insisted a few years ago on not wanting to play at fullback? We've seen with Zinchenko the position evolve and give much more opportunity to pretty much become an extra midfielder for large parts of the match. With Ainsley's speed, I think he'd have been great at giving us an extra body in midfield while also being able to get back into position quickly when needed. Do you think he'll have some regrets when he looks back in a few years?
Oh, beyond doubt. Beyond doubt. It's funny. I think there'll be a lot of people with regrets about Ainsley Maitland-Niles' situation. I'm sure Arsenal regret not taking £15 million from Wolves way back when. To lose him for nothing, well, that's quite a big drop-off there. But I also think the player will have regrets. I think there was an incredible opportunity for him around that summer of, I think it was 2020, to establish himself and, just be a really important squad member. Not even necessarily someone who started every game, but someone who was versatile, very useful. And it's a shame, I think, that, since then, none of his moves have particularly worked out. And I don't know what the future holds for him. I hope he can turn it round and pull it back and make a really good career for himself. He's in a decent position now as a free transfer, but he was part of a pretty dismal Southampton team last season. Yeah, I think there'll be regrets on all sides. What about you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very difficult to foresee the development of a position like fullback in the way that he did, but I'm pretty sure I remember. Did he play like Arteta's first 2 or 3 games at right back, and he played in a sort of inverted way?
Yeah, and it was happening elsewhere in the league. City were doing it by then. Fabian Delph was playing fullback for Man City while Arteta was still there. This was already happening, and Ainsley was doing it. He was doing it at Arsenal. He was playing right back, and as you say, stepping into midfield, or playing narrow at times, or playing as a left wing back, but joining in with central midfield. He was doing it. And he was well suited to it. Yeah, I think he wasn't Zinchenko. But no, he could do a different kind of job in that position.
I think where he will probably look back with some regret is not seeing the opportunity he had at right back at Arsenal, even if it wasn't exactly what he wanted. But then there were always kind of mixed messages about where he wanted to play. I remember him talking about wanting to play as a winger. And then he wanted to play as a midfielder. And I think if he just got his head down and really worked hard at that right back position, especially under somebody like Mikel Arteta, even if his long-term future wasn't assured at Arsenal, I think he would now be, a very well-established fullback. He could play on both sides. Remember, he played as a wing back in the FA Cup semi-final and final You know, it was Bukayo Saka on the bench back then. It was Ainsley Maitland-Niles who played.
Yeah, left wing back.
You know? So I think that versatility in both fullback/wing-back positions is something that he really should have lent into. That was the big opportunity for him. And I think his desire or his look, we talked earlier about a player wanting what they want from their career, you know, and if he wanted to play central midfield, you know, I get it, but I think he had the opportunity to be a fullback, and I think he let it pass him by, unfortunately. And like you, I hope he goes somewhere, and I hope he gets, you know, a good club and a good manager who can bring out, you know, the talent that is in there. You know, at the end of the day, he leaves Arsenal. I think he played 125 games for Arsenal, the club he grew up at. So, you know, he did pretty well.
Players do that.
Exactly, you know, and I hope he, you know, after a couple of years where it hasn't really gone well for him, I hope he does go on and have a good career somewhere else.
Yeah, and he left Arsenal on good terms. And we say, oh, will he have regrets? Perhaps. But I do think we ask a lot of these young footballers, and he's making some of those statements or some of those decisions at 19, 20, 21 years of age. And in a young footballer's career, you know, guidance is incredibly important. And, you know, lots of people play a role in that. The immediate family, the agent. And I think, to be fair to Ainsley, I don't think he always had that great environment to give him the best support in his decision making. And I think that shows how critical that can be for a young player. And I think he's in a much more sort of stable place now. You know, he's changed agents a few times in his short career. And I hope that, you know, he can now make the right decision for him about what he wants to do.
Before we go on to your question, here's another Fabrizio update. Thomas Partey, concrete chance to leave, but only if a very good proposal arrives. Arsenal rate Romeo Lavia as a potential replacement. I have a great relationship with his agents. Chelsea interested too, but the focus is on Moises Caicedo. So who knows? Who knows?
There's a lot in there.
There is.
Let me have a look. Chelsea's focus is on Moises Caicedo. Yes, that's correct. But there are other clubs who
Chelsea's focus? See, that's the way that is.
Yeah, that threw me there.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I don't think he's Arsenal's focus at this point in time. But Lavia's liked by lots of people. Yeah, I mean, he's a very well-regarded young talent, has been for a long time. I'm sure Chelsea, you know, maybe City, others would be looking at him. But he's a very young player, you know. I just mentioned it wasn't a great Southampton team last season.
No. But he's good. I like him. I can see, the potential there for sure.
Yeah, he's got a bit of swagger about him for sure. And I think he's a big prospect. So yeah, well, listen, we wish Ainsley well.
For sure.
What? So we have another question.
Yeah, why not?
Okay. I thought this was interesting. Andy C on Discord. I seem to remember on previous pods, you both said you were uncomfortable about us going for players who would cost close to 100 million. Do you still feel like this with the Rice deal? And has our recent improvement with transfers changed how you feel about those big fees?
Maybe a little, yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think the way that the market changes and the market develops makes those deals a little more easier to get your head around, I should say. There is always a gamble when you spend that amount of money. £100 million it's an enormous amount of money, you know? And we lose sight of that because we're always looking at it in the context of football and football transfers, you know? There was a lot of that last week, wasn't there, when West Ham rejected our first bid. And it was like, oh, just throw another 15 million, you know. And it's like, it's 15 million pounds. And like the deal that Arsenal had proposed was somewhere in the region of 90 million pounds, which would smash our existing transfer record as it is, you know. But, you know, for somebody like Declan Rice, you're paying the English tax, not the Irish tax on that one. But he is an England international, 24 years of age. You know, he's coming basically into his prime at Arsenal, West Ham, Premier League money, all that kind of stuff. I think makes it a bit easier to come to terms with those kinds of prices, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think?
I would say I'm still. I think I'm still in the camp where I'd rather buy two £50 million players than a £100 million player. And I really want Declan Rice. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But if you asked me, you know, given our budgetary situation, to be fair, you know, we seem to have a lot of money compared to many clubs. But I still think when you look at the list of sort of £100 million signings there or thereabouts, it is very difficult for them to live up to that billing and feel like a success. You know, there aren't too many in that bracket where you look at them and think, well, that was absolutely worth every penny. I suppose my sort of comfort level with Rice, first thing I'd say about Rice is Arsenal have been working on this deal for a long time. And I think when they got into it, they thought that sort of 70 or 80 million pounds felt pretty realistic. And actually, even in the last few months, the market seems to have changed. You know, I don't know if it's off the back of Mudryk going for such an extortionate fee, but you're now seeing Brighton saying they want at least 100 million for Caicedo. And look, these are good players, but these are huge sums of money, like extraordinary sums of money. And yeah, it feels like for a Premier League to Premier League transfer, the numbers can just be plucked from anywhere. I suppose, yeah, my level of comfort with the Rice, if it did get close to 100, is sort of roughly where I was with 50 million for Ben White, where at that point in time, 50 million for a Premier League player outside the top six felt like an extraordinary amount of money. But I had great belief in, you know, the talent identification and his ability and all those things. I kind of feel the same about Rice. You know, I know that he can be a top player, but I am still like sort of staggered by what it takes to sign a top Premier League player. But
I think that's the market. I think it is the market. I think you know, if you're West Ham and you're selling Declan Rice and you're saying, well, look, Mudryk cost 100 million. He's done fuck all at Chelsea so far. Anthony cost 95 million. Harry Maguire cost 82 million, whatever it was.
Yeah, Grealish 100 million.
Grealish 100 million. You know, he's had a good second season, obviously, at Manchester City. But if you're West Ham, why would you take anything less than that for your best player when there are examples of other big clubs spending just as much or maybe just about as much on players who are nowhere near as good? So,
and there is interest from a Man City in someone like Declan Rice, which West Ham can leverage a bit, you know, to push the price up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in answer to the original question, I'm not hugely comfortable with it. But I do accept that when you're signing a Premier League player and when you're signing an English player, there is a massive premium attached. And I suppose the question is, do I think there's a value in that? And I do. Like, I do think if we are to lose Xhaka and we are to lose potentially Partey as well, there is enormous value in bringing in someone who knows this league, every ground in this league, every team, who knows this city, who can hit the ground, hopefully running.
Yeah.
I think that is worth paying a premium for.
Yeah, that's what you're paying for, as well as, you know, the player and all the reasons that we've talked about, you know, intra-Premier League signings and all the rest of it.
I by the way, on the subject of Declan Rice, the FA in England put out quite good sort of training videos from the international camp. They're probably more entertaining than some of the games, I would say. There's a great one with the goalkeepers. I think goalkeeping training is really satisfying to watch. I don't know if it's just because like it's all goals and shots, but there's something about the precision of the work they do that's really captivating. But in their most recent one, some Arsenal fans will be interested to note there was some lovely link-up play in one of the small-sided games, some examples of Declan Rice and Bukayo Saka combining to great effect. So if you're fully bought in on Declan Rice at this point in time, that may be worth a watch.
All right. Let me ask a couple here because there are two or three questions like this. Noling says, "Hi gents, are you convinced that KSE know how to build winners as they've won in NFL, NHL and NBA titles in recent years, and Arsenal have much improved?" And Jad says, "Denver Nuggets won the NBA championship last week. It was their first ever title in their entire history. A few years ago, Josh Kroenke made a statement about how KSE's aim for Arsenal was to win the Champions League. Those quotes were not fully embraced on this podcast back then, rightfully so in my opinion, considering the position we were in at the time. But do you think those words hold more value or are more believable now?"
Well, you can't knock the record. I mean, KSE have delivered wins across many of their teams of late, as the question points out, NBA being the latest one. It is such a different landscape, though. You know, we're talking about these problems in football of having these rules and regulations that can be bent or broken, maybe, depending on the outcome of the charges Man City face. Whereas the American sports system is so much more controlled. And things like the draft system, for example, wage caps. You know, I think KSE can probably fare pretty well and pretty competently in that environment. But the Premier League is the Wild West. And
the gold rush.
Yeah. And I think it holds a lot of allure for that reason. And I think it would be a crowning achievement for KFC if they could win a Premier League or a Champions League. I think it would rank pretty close alongside the Super Bowl for them. But I just think they're up against a whole different kind of competition from where I'm stood. And that's without an intimate knowledge of US sports.
Sure. What do you think? I think it's fair to say that they appear to have learned from some of the mistakes that they made. You know?
Yeah. I think they've really transformed their perception at Arsenal. I don't think they're like beloved, but I feel like it's been a while since I heard Kroenke out at Arsenal.
Yeah, I mean, nobody talks about the owners when you win a lot of football games.
Exactly.
When you spend money on players, which help you win football games. So, you know, and I think Arsenal now is a better run football club than it was, which doesn't absolve them of some of the decisions that they made or didn't make or everything else. But if you want to give credit where it's due, it is a better run football club. We are a better team than we were. And that's, you know, all that fans want really, is to have a good team, an enjoyable team. We've got that right now. And hopefully, you know, we can go on and lift the prizes that we all want to see us lift.
Yeah, and I think KSC themselves would say if it is a better run club, a lot of the credit is due to the management team who are actually on the ground in London, you know, day in, day out. I think while KSC are ultimately responsible for everything, you know, day to day, there are other people.
But that's their ultimate responsibility, is to put those people in charge. They make the decisions about who those people are, and they made, you know, maybe some wrong decisions or you know, didn't do things with the kind of due diligence that they should have in the past, and now we're at the other side of that, thankfully. So
we are indeed.
Yeah,
we are indeed.
Where are we? I think we've kind of done everything more or less, haven't we? Here's one from James Bruff. He said, "Good morning, fellas. With rumours of Saliba's new squad number, how likely are we to see a 1-11 starting lineup next season?" I saw this. He's after 2? Is that it?
Some talk that he's after number 2. Yeah. Is it unoccupied? I believe it is.
Yeah. There's no 2. There's no 2.
So maybe he would go to 2. 1-11. What would that be?
Well,
Ramsdale,
1 would be Ramsdale. Well,
Saliba.
3 Tierney, so no. Unless Zinchenko takes 3, but...
Or a signing comes in and takes 3, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Some talk of Kieran Tierney staying now. I saw people chatting about that on Twitter, but I haven't looked into it in any great detail.
Yeah. Well, certainly there seems to be a bit of a gap between Newcastle's expectations and Arsenal's valuation.
Yeah. They're probably only offering 35 million, and Arsenal are like 50 million. 50 million, you fuckers.
They're holding out 50 or nothing, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've seen talk of interest in Cucurella from Newcastle. They might just be, trying to make Arsenal sweat a bit and see if they can get a better price. Who's number 4? Ben White.
Yep.
Number 5, Thomas Partey. Number 6, Gabriel, Bukayo Saka, Martin Odegaard, Gabriel Jesus, Emile Smith-Rowe, Gabriel Martinelli. There's a chance, but there's a few of those players who might be headed towards the exit, which could scupper some of those plans.
Could be on the way, yeah. Depends on who the replacements are.
Let's just say Thomas Partey did leave. You've got to take number 5 if you're William Saliba, haven't you? As much as we love a tribute to Abu Dhabi.
It's a good centre-half number 5.
Come on.
5 and 6 are the best centre-half numbers, I think.
I agree wholeheartedly.
But football has moved on, James, past us old guys.
Us old middle-aged guys complaining about cheating and breaking rules.
Yeah.
We belong to a different time.
William Saliba probably wants a Pokemon instead of a number on his back.
The thing is, what people forget is that Jack Walker, he sports washed people into believing that Blackburn was a decent place. That was his ultimate goal, and he achieved it. Footballers moved to Blackburn. Blackburn was seen as acceptable in high society. We've been sports washed since the beginning, if we're honest.
Right from the very start. I have to do this one right at the end. It comes from the Discord. It comes from Les Dudis, who says, "Will my shameless name change get my question read out?"
It will.
It did.
So Les Dudis, arise, Sir Les.
So Leslie of the Dudis clan, you are, I
want to say, by the way, my social media replies, and by the way, wow, what a mess Twitter is at the moment. I just want to get that in.
What with the ads everywhere?
Tab. Twitter thinks I want to read a lot of ITK bros who've bought blue ticks. That's what Twitter thinks I want to read.
I know. I do not look at the For You tab at all. I only go to following, but even still,
I think when you load it up, the first thing that comes up is, for me at least, it's
the For You.
Yeah.
You have to click in the app. Yeah, you have to click in the app to...
It's infuriating. But my replies and mentions across all platforms are full of people just commenting, "Let's do this" on stuff, which I greatly appreciate. My wife in the week asked me, "What's all this?" I think she's had some interaction on her account. So she's like, "Why are people writing 'Let's do this' on my Instagram?" I had to sort of try and explain.
Where do you think most of the nonsense in James's life comes from?
Yeah.
This fucking podcast. I'm sorry.
File it with file it with the magpies in nonsense from the fucking
nonsense
football
from
podcast.
the Arsecast Extra. All right. Well, listen. Thank you to everybody for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show as always.
We've done this, I guess.
We've done this. And
we've done this.
Don't think that one's going to work.
No.
We'll just have to wait to the start of.
I flew too close to the sun there.
You did. It's been a hit and miss episode for you in terms of catchphrases.
There's always next week, though. That's the thing.
Get training.
People are going to keep coming back for.
Less birthday parties, more sitting at home in front of the mirror, you know, a bit like Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. You know, you talking to me? Doing your Les
Practicing
Davis.
my catchphrases.
Practicing your catchphrases. All right. We will leave it there. Get this podcast out for everybody. Thanks a million. And we will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.